right. Welcome back to another episode of Justice Speaks. Tonight, I have the famous Liz Codina. Hi, Liz. How are you tonight?
Doing well, and you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Justice Speaks. I'm so excited to talk to you tonight, get to know a little bit more about you and your culture. So I'm just going to start off with the first question. How do you, Miss Codina, identify?
I identify as Mexican American. In most spaces that I'm in, I label myself as a feisty Latina.
Awesome. And what is your profession? What do you do day to day?
I work in the philanthropic sector. The organization that I work for is a private foundation based in Omaha, but we fund initiatives across the state of Nebraska. And we also do a little bit of work in Iowa. In most of my free time, I dedicate that to my community activism. So very active in the DEI space and connecting with other Latinx individuals to build the leadership capacity of our community and also to create access and eliminate barriers for communities of color.
I love that. It's awesome. And being a Latino woman, how has that shaped your life, being a Mexican American?
So, one of the narratives that often comes up, especially with my group of friends that also identify as BIPOC, is the fact that with these identities, the ones that you can see and others that are hidden, I'm often the only one or one of a very few individuals in the spaces that I'm in that have these identities. So oftentimes, by far, I'm the youngest person in a space, the only daughter of immigrants in predominantly white spaces, and oftentimes the only person of color in some spaces. And I think that goes back to this larger community dialogue that we have about representation and creating more access points for a more diverse group of people to be able to access decision-making bodies and have more control over their day-to-day.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about representation because a lot of people were like, oh, I've seen people have commented back to me, oh, that doesn't matter that you don't see someone up there. And I'm like, well, that's because you've never had to think about it. If you're someone who's never seen someone in your position, to see someone finally get there, it makes a difference. It really does. And so I applaud you for opening the door, not removing the gatekeeper, but getting some new gatekeepers so that open the gate a little bit wider so more people can come and enjoy and shape their communities, because we all have a voice and we all have talents, but sometimes it takes someone who looks just like us to make us realize what power that we do have. So that's amazing. I love that.
I appreciate that. That's something that I hold really close to my heart. So getting a little personal and going back to many, many years ago. So I grew up in a family of immigrants. So my parents are not college educated. My mom didn't finish high school. My dad just has 1 year of college under his belt, but they started a family very early on. They decided to immigrate from Mexico to the US to eventually give their future children a better life. And growing up, in that environment, in a lot of spaces, not seeing teachers that looked like me or professionals that looked like me, in many spaces, that I think has the ability to limit your dreams in some cases. So I'm so lucky, by the time that I got to high school and closer to the college level, just, being in my first college class at the University of Nebraska at Omaha and seeing professors that looked like me and spoke Spanish and had similar experiences, it really made all the difference. I think it really gave me the affirmations that I needed to be able to explore things that were so unknown to both me and my family as far as opportunities. And because I was given that space by all of my mentors and community leaders, I really see it as a lifelong passion to be able to do that, the same thing for others.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Thanks.
So my next question for you is, what is your opinion on Latinx? So for those who don't know, that is like the non-gendered way to name someone who's from Latin America instead of Latino or Latina, Latinx. Sometimes in Spanish, it's Latine. So what's your opinion on that?
So I will first say that it's a very controversial
yeah, it is.
among a lot of, people from my community, even close friends, have this debate. A lot of the labels that are assigned to my community and the communities I identify with are really social constructs, and they change from decade to decade. So for me, I tend to use the term Latinx because my general understanding of the intent is the fact that it's a gender neutral term. And I'm a huge supporter of the LGBTQ plus community. And if, I can be more inclusive by using this word, then it's definitely something that I'm willing to do, especially given the fact that there are so many labels and everybody has different preferences. So for me, it's something that I use, especially among my more progressive group of friends. However, I will say that I often, like in many spaces, have to like code switch a little bit. So, if I'm speaking with perhaps like older generation members of the Latinx community, there seems to be a little bit more of a pushback with the term. So just kind of depending on the space that I'm in, I learn how to right size and use a term that will help, me communicate better with the other person on the receiving end.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me. Like for yourself, you're like, you know what, I'm Latina, but just to be respectful of someone else. But yeah, there's so much controversy. Some people say, oh, they made that up in the US and this and that. And I'm just like, man, I don't know. I don't have a say because I'm not Latina. I speak Spanish, but I'm not Latina. They think I am sometimes, but I'm like, nope, I'm not going to go there. I'm Black. I just speak the language. It's okay. But yeah, just to be respectful, because it doesn't hurt you to respect what someone else prefers. It really doesn't. It doesn't kill you to just, add a little kindness and just be polite with that. So
right.
And speaking of, me being Black, there, as when slavery happened, in the Americas, Black people were sent here from Africa, but the majority of slaves were sent to Latin America. So today you have like countries like Colombia, Panama, Puerto Rico, you have the Dominican Republic, you have all these spaces where there is a lot of people who have like African heritage, they're African descendants, but they have adapted to the culture, language of those countries. But I've come across that there is some anti-Blackness in the Latinx space. So for some people who are Dominican, they're Dominican, they're not Black. I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. There's this distinction. So what is your opinion on that? And why do you think that's happened, or what's kind of your view on that?
So to be like super transparent, I personally did not realize how much of an anti-Black sentiment there was in the Latinx community until the last year. And of course, everything that has happened politically and socially and the environment that, those situations have created, and the dialogue that it's forced a lot of communities to have. It's something that I'm quite saddened by, especially when, I've respected a lot of leaders in the Latinx community that don't necessarily understand, movements like Black Lives Matter and the systems of oppression that really affect all communities of color. And this is not an excuse by any means, but I think one of the reasons that that may happen is because, the Black community has been oppressed in the United States in a much different way than Latinos have, for example, right? We all experience these unjust systems in different ways and at different levels. And, this is something that really hit close to home for me because I was exposed to this concept of colorism at a very early age in my household. So I have two parents with different backgrounds, both from Mexico, but my mom has, relatives from Spain on her side of the family. So when you look at my mom, she's very light in complexion, whereas my dad is very dark, has very dark complexion and looks more indigenous. So I remember as a child, my mom, for example, insulting my dad and making fun of his dark skin. And that is something that's really perpetuated in all sorts of mediums like social media, television, both in Latin America, Mexico, and the US and other parts of the world. We often see main characters or lead characters that have lighter skin or white complexions, whereas, positions like, or actors that are filling the roles of criminals or, evil roles or things of that nature are often cast by individuals with a darker complexion. And obviously, as a brown woman living in the United States, although I consider myself an American, I was born here, I really live, in this limbo world because I am too brown physically to be considered American by a lot of people. But then speaking of cultures, when I go back to Mexico, where my parents are from, I'm often too white to be Mexican. And, that's something that seems to be common with, some other individuals that I know that are also the children of immigrants.
Wow. It's hard, man. It's like, you just try your best to be yourself, but then people still don't get it. They still don't accept it. It's just like, you know what? This is my culture too. I may grow up in a different way, but yeah, I mean, that must be tough to just be stuck between the two.
Yes. It also goes back to just the general construct of the us versus them, right? And people in positions of power and people that have created these systems that we have to navigate, wanting to group people, to separate people, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, the Latinx community struggles with a lot of the same things that the Black community does, as far as disparities in health, access to education, just general, economic well-being and things of that nature. But because of that dialogue that's perpetuated in the community, it really makes it a barrier and it makes the system stronger and the struggle a lot harder, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because together we have so much power, but if we're too busy othering or we're too busy us versus them, then you're right, that system does win. So yeah, I thank you for your transparency that you're like, you know what, I didn't even know. I didn't even see that. And honestly, I'm not sure if maybe because I kind of studied abroad and stuff like that, literally in Argentina, there's a phrase that goes, no hay negros en Argentina. So back in the day, there used to be Black people in Argentina, but they literally sent them all off to war. Or the people were like, I'm not going to war, so I'm going to run away to Brazil. And then now they call their friends negro, and it's strange. I'm just like, this is very interesting, these dynamics here. And it's I can even people didn't even guess if I was from Argentina. Most of them oh, you're from Brazil, right? And it's oh, there's no Black people here at all. This is really interesting that you guys have, we know how like race played out in the US, but it's very interesting
Yes.
to experience how it plays out globally. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I guess has shocked me, because obviously I've experienced racism my entire life since as far as I can remember, and this concept of colorism has been very present.
Yes.
But I think, you know, as an adult, learning all of the things that I did in college about the struggles that communities of color faced in my community work and advocacy, I just always thought that our communities were more on the same page and willing to work together because we face the same struggles. So it was really hard for me to process just the, you know, after the riots across the US, just that anti-Black sentiment in the community and the lack of understanding of, you know, why communities are taking to the streets to protest, you know, injustice. So I was so, you know, glad. One of the nonprofits that I was on a board for at the time, we held a series of conversations with other community partners just because we wanted to talk about that anti-Black sentiment in the Latinx community, call it out, and do our part to break down these barriers. Because at the end of the day, you know, like you said, we're stronger together.
Wow, that's great. I love it. I love the conversation, the dialogue, because that's really where it gets started. Because sometimes people just aren't thinking about it. The bias is so strong, or they're just like, wait, what? That happens? I totally missed that. So just having those dialogues, creating safe spaces where people can just share their heart and be like, hey, this is where I missed it, but get me up to speed, and I'm here to listen. What is something that you think people get wrong about your culture sometimes?
So as a member of the Latinx community, one of the things that I often face is the fact that certain individuals or groups of individuals will lump all brown people into like one category, but we are so diverse, not only in language, but also in background and history, our exposure to different types of government, dictatorships to democracies, different income levels, different religions and backgrounds. So I wish that was something that people were more intentional about, you know, instead of just assuming everybody's Mexican, to really just be a little bit more aware of, you know, people's backgrounds and people's differences.
I have a crazy story about that. I had a former coworker, and they told me I had just started working there, and they told me that someone who like cleaned was Mexican, and they had taken a trip home to Mexico. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm thinking like this person's been working there for forever, so they're gonna know that. They're gonna know where they're from. And I was speaking to this person in Spanish, and they're understanding what I said, but they were speaking to me in English. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But I've gotten that before. Like, it's kind of weird. Sometimes people think it's weird that a Black person speaks Spanish to them, so they speak in English. So I saw her again, and I talked to her in Spanish, and she's like, I'm not Mexican. And I was like, I am so sorry. She's like, yeah, I used to work with people who speak Spanish, so I picked it up, but I don't speak it. So it's like one of my team members just assuming she's like Mexican. I'm like, dude, you like really didn't talk to her and ask where she was from? Like, she's from Afghanistan, dude. Like,
oh wow,
like really bad. Like, not even, you know. I was just like, okay. Always ask for yourself. But yes, or people, do you speaking Mexican and saying stuff like that? It's like, come on, do your homework.
Yeah, I will say though, I mean, I think it's important for people to ask, but I've also been on the not so great side of that. So like in some spaces, when I get asked once, like, where are you from? And I say Texas, but then I get asked, where are you from? Like 3 more times, because what they're really asking is like, why are you brown? So I feel like it's important to ask, but ask once and take that answer, you know?
Where are you really from?
Yeah.
From here. Just
from
like
here.
You know what? The United States, USA, it's
Yeah.
possible.
But like, really, where are you from?
Do you know that I think every single POC gets asked that question, like for real? Like I see TikToks and people have like 1 million views and likes. I'm like, because everyone relates to this. Like people will try to tell you that you are wrong. Oh no, you're not from there. Didn't we just meet?
And then followed sometimes by like a series of microaggressions, like, you speak English really well. Well, I sure hope so, because it's my first language. So
it's okay. I speak both, and being bilingual like happens and stuff. I know it's not common here in the USA, but you know, globally.
The same thing I, have to admit happens to me when I'm interacting with some people that are from Mexico, like born and raised. When they hear me speak Spanish, apparently my Spanish doesn't sound like Mexican Spanish. So I always get questioned like, are your parents really from Mexico? Yep, last I checked. But, as you know, in the US, for example, with such a diverse geography, we have different inflections and accents in just the US alone. So yeah, it just kind of depends where you've landed and where you've grown up.
Seriously though, I mean, right, someone in New York doesn't sound like someone in Alabama, but they're both from the US though. So it's kind of like, I mean, learning Spanish and kind of taking on like an Argentine accent because I live there, like it doesn't make sense, but that's just how life is. Like it doesn't all make sense. We don't all talk the same. It's okay, but I understand what you're saying, so don't talk about me.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about before that your parents immigrated from Mexico. So you described a little bit of your experience, but what's your experience being a child of immigrants? And then like, what does that mean for you today? I saw a post on Facebook and it seemed like you were really proud, and I thought that was an amazing post.
Thank you. So I think in more recent years, I've been more comfortable with sharing my story. So my parents are, as I mentioned, my parents are immigrants from Mexico. So my dad came over on a visa. So he arrived to the US legally when he came over. But my mom was brought over as a youth. So her family was living in Texas. They had a house in Texas and would go back to the ranch in Mexico during the summers. And her father was a US resident, but unfortunately passed away before he could, solidify the paperwork for half of his 6 children. And, so my mom, growing up was undocumented. My dad's visa eventually expired and he stayed here, so he was undocumented as well. And, growing up in a household with immigrant parents meant that you were always reminded that your parents pretty much like crossed a river to give their future children a better life. So, that has always been a huge part of my story and my dreams and my goals is to, accomplish as much as I can to break as many ceilings as I can and to eliminate barriers for others that will come, after me, because I know a lot of people have already done that work, and that's why I've been able to get as far as I have. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And, also growing up and experiencing what my parents experienced as immigrants in the US really fuels my passion for community service. And that entire narrative is what has caused me to dedicate my, life's work to DEI, to access, and to the development of people in my community, because I know that we're missing from a lot of decisions and from a lot of influencing bodies at all levels and in many spaces. And it's important that we are represented, because at the end of the day, these, things have such a huge effect on our lives.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for being transparent and sharing that. I mean, I'm
course.
sure that was probably scary at some point in time, that when you like got old enough to know like what that meant, you're like, wow, okay, that's what we're working with here.
I think originally for a long time I was super hesitant just because of the racist sentiment in
Yeah.
a lot of spaces. I also didn't feel safe, but I think at some point that really shifted for me because I think our stories hold a lot of power,
You do.
and being able to share that story with others, has been a game changer for some. Just realizing where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. I think it really helps you connect to people, and it really affirms those around you. If you can do it with that type of background, they can too, because they, might be in a similar situation. So it really just shifted for me. And now I want to use my story to inspire others, but also to continue to fuel the community advocacy work that I do.
Yeah. It's like breaking that silence has like a lot of power.
Yes. Yeah. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, for sure. And what is something you want people to know or understand about your culture, your background, or like what work you're doing now? What is the last thing you want to leave with those who are watching?
Sure. I would say, I would just hope that people take an interest in learning more about people that don't look like you or sound like you.
Yeah.
Our world and our community is so diverse and so rich in different perspectives that I think we all benefit, not only individually, but our organizations benefit, our communities benefit when we can be aware of the privilege that we have and the privilege that others around us don't have because of, how they identify or their experiences.
Yeah.
So I really always just highly encourage people to look around the spaces where you hold privilege, where the spaces where you are, look around, see who's missing, and do your part and be intentional about creating space for those people.
Yeah, and just be willing to bring people up with you, because there's enough work for everyone. Trust.
Yes.
You don't have to hold it all to yourself.
Right.
And it's just like when you invite more people to chime in, it just makes it so much richer. Like the experience or the work that you're doing or the change you're trying to make. It's like, wow, someone else's perspective taught me something, or
Right.
it helped us get it done faster in a different way, or just making new discoveries. So all of us being at the table is really a benefit for just society in general. So
Definitely.
yeah. Well, Liz, I'd like to thank you for your time. I love chatting with you, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Huge fan of your platform, and I just appreciate you holding this type of space for individuals.
Thank you.
All right.